it was this false sense of masculinity that I had, like suppressing the feelings and just shoving them down and not feeling them.
It always makes me laugh that a lot of the men I work with are like, I'll jump out of a helicopter, I will go whitewater kayaking, physical risks that, even verge on the potential for death.
But not emotional risks.
But the emotional risks can be really terrifying.
I've told people, it's like, yeah, for the past 8 months, I've felt like I've been on, a low dose of mushrooms, just in tune with my senses. And it's like, this is just the way that it can be now.
When we get curious about our differences, we can start to recognize, oh, you bring this to the relationship, I bring this. We don't have to be the same.
99% of the things we worry about are just created in our own head.
I want this. I want to be tied up. And the other person says, well, I don't like that, or I don't do that, or that's not me. If we start to get to, we can get curious, and then we can understand, well, what are you wanting from that experience? Maybe doesn't have to happen with ropes.
What's up, captains? Thank you for joining me on today's podcast, because I had the pleasure of interviewing Shana James, and we talk about a topic that needs a lot more discussion. That is relationships and sex. Unfortunately, these topics have been taboo, and I imagine that has contributed to the 50% divorce rate, and 75%, I believe, is the statistic for second-time divorces. So it's clear that relationships in general have not been working. They're not the fulfilling, deeply connecting relationships that we all long for. How do we cultivate that? 1, through honesty. 2, through getting vulnerable, both with ourselves and with our partner. 3, getting curious. And 4, communicating. Those were the 4 biggest takeaways that I took away from her book, Honest Sex, which is out now. You guys can pick up a copy. Link will be in the show notes. I highly recommend this book. As you hear on the podcast, it's all highlighted and, bookmarked with different tabs, some of which we get into on the podcast. Unfortunately, we only had an hour, so we didn't get to dive deep into everything, but we covered a lot of the most important takeaways that I got from this book. And it was fantastic. You guys are going to love this interview. And before we dive into it, I'd like to give you a word from our sponsors. First up, this episode is brought to you by Lambs, this EMF blocking clothing that I've loved. I've traveled with it every single time that I fly. Just put their sticker on my tumbler. Keep the bad off your goods. They should have, they should have done multiple A's, because their mascot is a lamb, right? So it should have been keep the bad off your goods. Anyways, you guys can get, I think it's 10%, maybe more than 10% off of Lambs if you head over to getlambs.com and enter code Captain Morgan, or just click the link in the description. That will save you some money on the world's healthiest apparel, because it really is like you're wearing antioxidants, because it's blocking up to 99% of the harmful electromagnetic radiation that you're being exposed to from things like your cell phone, your computer, Wi-Fi signals, 5G towers. So especially if you live in a crowded city or you travel often like I do, I highly recommend picking up Lambs apparel. They just came out with their 2.0 shirt and their new underwear. So it fits better, it's more comfortable, and it's also antimicrobial. So you can wear it multiple times without wearing deodorant, and you'll still smell good. So super cool little bonus. Again, head over to getlambs.com, enter code Captain Morgan. Next up, this episode is brought to you by HVMN, specifically their new product, Ketone IQ, which I just took before recording this podcast because it acts like rocket fuel for my brain. Turns it on. Really, it gets my brain going. That, especially combined with the next sponsor that I'm going to talk about, is a fantastic combo. But what I use ketones for is, like I just mentioned, mental clarity and performance and physical endurance. It's one of my number one recommendations for somebody who wants to improve their physical endurance as well. So you guys can get the hookup on HVMN's Ketone IQ. If you head over to hvmn.com, enter code Captain Morgan 10, that will save you 10% on the world's best tasting exogenous ketones, because there are other ones out there. I've had them. They taste like shit. Ketone IQ, specifically their shots, are a little bit watered down. So these actually taste good. And I take this the Ketone IQ shot with me when I travel, because this is under the arbitrary 3.4 ounces that you're allowed to travel with. This is 2 ounces, 1 serving. So great to travel with. Head over to hvmn.com, enter code Captain Morgan 10. And last but certainly not least, this episode is brought to you by Newtopia. This, and not just this, but any product from Newtopia is a fantastic combination with Ketone IQ. So before recording podcasts, I will take a few squirts of Xamarin juice, because what this is a rapid neurotransmitter stimulator. So you just spray it underneath your tongue, and within 2 to 15 minutes, you are able to be more verbally fluent. It's good for social situations. It calms you down, relax you, but also keeps you engaged. So it's really cool for social situations and before podcasts or meetings, or just any time you want to have more fun. I keep it in my fanny pack, going out at parties. It's always a great conversation starter when you just take it out, spray it underneath your tongue. People are like, what is that? And you can give them some, help them feel good. So you guys can get the hookup on anything from Newtopia. Unfortunately, you cannot order each individual nootropic. They have 9 different formulations, I believe, and they all come together. And depending on which level of order you get, I recommend the World Domination, which is this box that I have right behind me. That includes everything, because I'm here to fucking dominate the world. And I imagine if you're a listener of the Captain's Lifestyle podcast, you settle for nothing less than excellence, aka world domination. And it's good stuff. I didn't mention this. This is the most important part of Newtopia, is that they are 100% customized to your brain's specific neurotransmitter imbalances. Because before you order, what they did is they took the Braverman test, which is like the gold standard when it comes to neurotransmitter assessments. And they basically took a lot of those questions and included them in their assessment. So based on the answers that you give to questions like, what is your diet like? What supplements are you currently taking? How is your sleep? Are you looking for more stress? Less or more stress? Are you looking for less stress, more focus, more creativity? Whatever. And then they customize each individual formulation specific to your answers. And this is where it gets cool. Each subsequent order gets further customized. So after your first order, then you can adjust the amount of different formulations that you get, as well as the effects of those formulations. So it's fucking rad. Really, really cool. I've had the founders on my podcast a few different times. Those are great episodes. But yeah, to get the hookup on anything from Newtopia, head over to newtopia.com/Taylor or click the link in the description to get the hookup and experience the Newtopia difference. All right, now on to today's conversation with Shana James. Hello, and welcome aboard another episode of the Captain's Lifestyle Podcast. This is your captain speaking, Taylor Morgan, and I am joined by a very special guest today who I had the pleasure of being on her podcast about a year and a half, 2 years ago. She just came out with Honest Sex. Her name is Shana James. Actually, is it Shana?
Shana James.
Yes, Shana James. My apologies. I knew I was going to mess that up.
All right, everybody does.
I just knew it. So let me give you a proper introduction. For the past 15 years, she has been coaching more than 1,000 leaders, CEOs, authors, speakers, and people with big visions who step into more powerful leadership to start and grow businesses, create more effective teams, increase their impact, get promoted, find love, rekindle spark, create a legacy, and become more personally inspired and fulfilled. She's been known for her ability to assess in only a few minutes the cause of dissatisfaction and stuck points in your profession and love life, while then creating a clear and unique path for you to have true success and incredible love. Referred to as a secret weapon, she cuts through distraction and provides direct access to your confidence, power, and clarity. Shana, welcome to the Captain's Lifestyle Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I love seeing all those bookmarks in your copy of the book.
Oh,
that's fun.
Yeah. Just finished reading this today. It's all highlighted up, got all the tabs in there of points that I want to touch on. This book was fantastic. I think it'll be, or it is, a fantastic resource for anybody out there who wants to improve their relationships, which should be every single human on the planet, right?
Yes. I know we don't get much education in how to do relationships well.
We don't. We don't. That's unfortunate.
Very unfortunate.
I had to do all of my own learning, which this is absolutely a big part of it. I am a beginner in this. I'm just starting to learn. Really, a lot of this learning came after my breakup because when we last recorded a podcast, I was in a relationship with my now ex, and we have since broken up. And that has taught me so much.
It's hard that we have to sometimes usually learn the hard way. But right, most of the men I work with, it's a lot of the men, I would say it's post-divorce, post-breakup, and this realization of, wow, okay, I can start to see my patterns and what I've done that hasn't worked or hasn't created a satisfying relationship. So it can be painful, but it's a really good opportunity also to grow and to see, okay, what's happening here for real.
Yeah. Speaking of that, in your book, you write, it could be part of our human condition, the breakup process specifically, or going through a divorce. And you describe it as the sand in an oyster that forces us to mature and love better. That's so true. That was the case for me.
Yeah.
Right? I really didn't understand what love was before the breakup. Yeah. Honestly, I had never really felt love. I honestly didn't know what it was until something in that triggered in me this new emotion of love. And now everything I do comes from a place of love. So for me,
that's beautiful. And I love the honesty of that, right? For me, to be willing to not know what love is, or to not even know, like, is this love? Is this not love? To question ourselves. Is an important foundation, rather than thinking we know it all, we've got it all, we have to be right, especially the men I work with. And that sense of, I've got to know, I've got to be the rock, I've got to get it right, and I can't be vulnerable and not know. But the not knowing is really the foundation of love and connection.
Yeah. Speaking of honesty and vulnerability, the 4 major things that I took away from your book were honesty, of course, it's in the title. Honesty, yes. Curiosity, vulnerability, and communication. Yeah. So I would like to first touch on the importance of each of those 4 things. Let's start with honesty. What does mature honesty mean to you, and why is it so important?
So, right, the difference between, say, a more immature honesty and mature honesty. Immature honesty is a lot of times when people say, like, well, I'm just saying, or, I'm just saying it like it is. I'm just calling it like it is. It's just the truth. Right? Just the facts. That, to me, often creates a lot of pain and suffering. And the person receiving that kind of honesty often doesn't feel seen or understood or connected with or loved or cared for. So mature honesty, as we can start to mature our honesty, we start to reveal our own vulnerability, right? So instead of saying, I give some examples in the book, instead of saying you're being an asshole, it's like, oh, when you said that you didn't like the meal I made for you, who knows, right? What it was. It's just a random example. I felt sad because I put a lot of time and energy into it, and I was trying to do something really nice for you. And so now, I'm just dealing with my feelings over here, right? That is an opportunity to then connect with the other person, and for 2 people to be known and understood and appreciated for what they're doing, versus just that wedge that comes down when it's like, you're being this way. No, you're being this way. So mature honesty doesn't have blame or shame or attacking. It has this revealing of what's happening for me over here, which it's more risky that way, because then we have to be seen, but it works a lot better. You
write in your book that the fastest path I teach for clients to access mature honesty is the willingness to get more vulnerable. Vulnerability turns our attention from attack or blame to a responsible, compassionate view. So mature honesty and vulnerability, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that first has to come with being honest and vulnerable with yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Because
there's a whole chapter in there of how, are you actually honest with yourself?
Yes. That's a huge thing that a lot of guys, I work with guys also, they don't want to face that. They put up the facade of everything's fine. I know what I'm doing. I've got it. Right. But until they're actually able to face themselves and get honest and vulnerable with themselves, that's when the real work starts to happen. Correct?
Yeah. And I think some of the honesty is about what we actually want, right? I work with I love being a woman who wants men to have what they want. And, I don't have a lot of hangups around sex or intimacy or any of those things. So I'm like, okay, let's get in there and let's know what you really want, because, what you want may not match with what someone else wants, but that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong about what you want or what you value or what is meaningful for you or what feels good to you, what gives you pleasure, right? So I think it's really important for men and all of us to have that foundation of, okay, what do I like? What do I want? And that it's ever evolving, right? We can sometimes think, oh, well, I knew what I wanted, when this relationship started. And then it can be threatening if we have new desires or if we, we start changing and growing and evolving. We all do. I think in a really alive relationship, we all grow and keep current with, oh, what are the new parts of me? And what am I learning? And what do I want here? But it can be tempting to put a relationship in a box because then we know, well, we chose each other for this, but if you change, you might not choose me. And if I change, I might not choose you. And it's risky.
It's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary. You had a quote in here. Most people choose the certainty of misery rather than the misery of uncertainty. Right? So they might get into that relationship thinking that that's what they want, but then as you grow and evolve, things change. And instead of making the difficult decision to end it or to first have the conversation, be honest and vulnerable, you would rather endure the misery than face the uncertainty.
Yeah. I mean, uncertainty can be a really scary place for most of us, myself included, and I've been through a divorce and dated a bunch after I've been divorced for 10 years now and had a couple longish relationships. And so there's been a lot of, all right, what if we don't put this in a box? What if we figure out like, who are we to each other, not based on what the culture says, right? That we have to be married or we have to do it this way. And, what if we actually focus and commit to staying alive and growing together. And some of those relationships, we ended up growing apart, but I don't see that as a failure, right? It's like as long as none of them have ended harshly or with any bad word, like there's still love there, right? But the more honest we get, the more we get to know ourselves, and then we get to be met in those places.
So for you, because I know a lot of people I talk to are scared of that uncertainty, hence why they're stuck in the certainty of misery, right?
Yeah.
So for you and how you work with your clients, what steps or tips or tricks, whatever, do you personally use and talk to your clients about on how to face that uncertainty?
The uncertainty. That's a great question. I mean, where I go is, especially working with men, is finding that place of sovereignty and that knowing of their innate goodness and their enjoyment of life itself, so that that relationship isn't the only thing giving them external validation or value or filling some of those holes of loneliness or, all the things that all the wounds that we have and the things that we're trying to work through. So I think the first place is to really create a life that is full of meaning and full of joy and full of, where you feel like you're having the impact you want to have in the world, which is, I imagine, some of the work I think you and I have talked about that you do with men, so that the relationship becomes more of an expression of that. We get to co-create something as opposed to trying to get filled by it.
Yes. A lot of men I've found, really almost every single man I talk to nowadays, we're able to come to the realization that they're settling, whether that's in their relationship, in their career, they're not fulfilled. And they're facing this uncertainty. They see it. And instead of going out at sea into the unknown, they stay in that place of misery. And until they're honest with themselves, they get vulnerable with themselves, they're able to face that. They're able to acknowledge that fear. And then they can get on the ship and sail out to uncertainty and, have the conversation, get the divorce, quit their job, whatever it is. But it's not until they create that vision for their future that they're able to say, okay, even just the possibility of being able to attain this ultimate vision, that's enough for me. That's my North Star.
For me to see. Yeah, I like that, right? So the vision helps clarify, oh, there's something else. I'm not just going to be left out at sea floating around with nothing. Yeah.
It's the combination. It's the combination of moving away from something that you don't enjoy and then moving towards. Yes.
The other thing I was thinking is that it always makes me laugh that a lot of the men I work with are like, I'll jump out of a helicopter. I will go whitewater kayaking, like big risks, physical risks that, even verge on the potential for death.
But not emotional risks.
But the emotional risks can be really terrifying. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I get to do with men too, is feel it with them, right? And be someone who can be there with them as a loving presence, and especially as a woman, because I think it makes it, I'm all for working with men. I think men working with men is fantastic. And I think there's certain work that when you, especially if you're working through some of your relationship struggles or the uncertainty of what if I say this and I don't know how someone's going to respond, or what if I say this and I'm rejected, as you practice it with someone else, and in this case with a woman, you start to get it in your bones of like, oh, I'm actually okay. And if I say this and I do get rejected, how would I actually respond to that instead of, game over? Saw that a big video game sign, like game over, you're dead, not going farther. It's like, oh, wait, I'm still here. And so we get to work through some of the shame and the fear and the frozenness and all of those things to be able to then have those conversations in real life.
Is that why you chose to work with men, to show them that it's okay to be honest and vulnerable with women?
I think so. I mean, I when I started, it's now been 20 years. When I started 20 years ago, I got to see some men be really vulnerable with me, and it showed me how we all have these vulnerable sides, it's not just women, even though we as women tend to be more emotional out front. I really got to see, oh my God, men are struggling and men are going through this, and really feeling like, oh, I get to be a place of love and care and practice. Cause in that, when I started, I was part of a team of women where we were giving men honest and loving feedback. And as I started thinking about it, it was like, oh, right, sometimes you can do this work with men and you get clear and you find these deeper parts of yourself, but then sometimes they go back to their relationships with women and it's like lost in translation. I don't even know what to say or how to say, or whoa, she doesn't react the same way that men react. So yeah, something about that became really powerful.
The communication, like how women, and this goes both ways, how men communicate with women and how women communicate with men. It's an art. It's like a science. And once you understand it, you can understand how to change your language in order to get what you want. So you mentioned an example in your book that I'm going to point out. And this has happened to me before in a past relationship. My partner, as you did in this example, got angry at your partner for walking ahead of you. And so the example was, you said like you walk too fast, or you're selfish for not thinking of me when you walk, or that's what you thought. And instead,
I'm like, I didn't say that.
Yeah. Instead, you got vulnerable and you said, I notice I feel sad and alone when we walk separately. I wonder if you'd be open to walking with me. So that is a perfect example of how to talk to a man to get what you want. Because in my example, my partner said what you had thought about saying is you walk too fast, or you're selfish.
You're right.
Yes.
You're selfish. I don't like this. You're not doing it the way I wanted.
If she would have said what you said, I notice I feel sad or alone. If you'd be open to walking with me, I would have been like, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, yes, instead of like feeling attacked and wanting to get defensive.
Yeah.
So understanding that communication between men, because men love being of service, right? So understanding how to communicate that way. Yeah. That was a really cool
and then
example.
It goes back and forth too, because okay, so then if I speak from that blame, shame, attack place, my partner's tendency would be to speak back from that, right? So if I say, you're being selfish, and then he's like, well, I'm either defending, I'm not, or
well, just walk faster.
You have your, just walk faster, or you have your things, right? And so we really have the power to create those conversations and to call out the other person's maturity also. Now, it doesn't always go well, right? Sometimes someone will be like, woof, that doesn't feel good. And we start to go down a shame spiral and start to defend anyway. But what I've learned is that we always have the capacity to stay vulnerable. So if someone says to me, well, just walk faster, or, you're not keeping up, or I don't like that you're making that request, I could go back into my young defensive ones, or I could say, ouch, I notice that doesn't really feel good. I actually need to talk about this to feel closer to you. And it is hard. I mean, that's another place of uncertainty, right? If we just put the defense down, we don't have to open ourselves up to be rejected. Whereas when we say something vulnerable like that, then we could be.
Because you can't control how the other person's going to react or respond, right? All you can control is your response. And
we can influence it, but we can't control it.
Yeah, exactly. And being able to get vulnerable like that multiple times, especially after being rejected,
right?
That requires you knowing yourself.
Yeah.
And being confident in yourself. which is something that I know a lot of men lack because they're relying, and women too, they're relying on external, what's the word?
Validation.
Yeah, external validation, right? So if they get rejected, then they go back to that scared inner child and get defensive instead of continuing to be vulnerable. So what are some strategies that we can use to continue to bring out that vulnerability in the face of rejection?
Well, like you said, that the more solid your knowing is of yourself, the more you'll recognize like, ooh, okay, that burns, you know. And I still don't have to give in to let the little ones run the show, right? Like I have a example in the book of we have all these different parts or all these different selves, and we get to choose which one drives the bus. So meditation is a really powerful way to be able to witness, oh, that's the one in me that wants to throw a tantrum and create a shit show. And oh, that's the one in me who's just pissed off at the world and is never going to be satisfied by what anybody does. And oh, that's the one in me who's a little more mature and can watch all of these different parts and then consciously choose how I want to interact with someone. So I would say meditation is a really good foundation for that. The other thing is, there's some exercises in the book to really look at, okay, this is what I'm thinking on the surface, or this is my first thought. And then what is vulnerable about this for me? So checking in to see, okay, why is this vulnerable for me? And then practicing with people too. So the more you have these conversations, the easier it gets in the heat of the moment where the rubber meets the road and there's a big fight or blow up or something to actually stay in that place.
You had a quote in the book from Eckhart Tolle from The Power of Now. Fantastic book.
Love that book.
And you just mentioned meditation and questioning your thoughts. And I think this is one of the most powerful realizations that people can come to is that your thoughts are simply thoughts. You get to choose which ones you believe.
Right.
You can observe them from a third party perspective.
Yes. Just because we have them doesn't mean that they're
curious
real.
about them. Yes. So now let's get into curiosity, which was one of the other big things that I took away from your book. How important is curiosity? That's a big question.
I mean, I think curiosity is, I would never say anything is everything, but in a way, I feel like curiosity it's all of it, right? Because that way too, I have an example in the book where, one partner wants to try something. Let's say I give the example of running to take it out of the bedroom, right? So, but it could be like, oh, I want to try having, I took this one out of the book because my editor was like, a little too risque. It was like one person wants to have sex in public, right? And the other one just basically is like, no, I don't do that. That's not who I am. I don't like it. That's not a very curious response, right? The curious response would be more like, okay, first vulnerable. Wow, that makes me really scared. I don't know if I could do that, but can you tell me more? Right? Can you tell me more about why you want that or what feels exciting to you about that? Or can we actually be together in this? So anytime somebody just says no, or even internally is just like, anytime we say, well, that's not me, we're reacting from an identity that we have about ourselves. Like you just said, right? Our thoughts are not necessarily reality. And we can rigidify ourselves by saying this is who I am and this is who I'm not. But if we get curious, we discover things about ourselves constantly for the rest of time that we wouldn't even know. So, right, in that moment, it might be like, okay, I can get curious about my partner. Why does my partner want that? I could also get curious about me. Well, why does that seem like such a thing I would never do? And who told me that I shouldn't do that? And do I not want that because I really don't enjoy it? Or do I not want that because I'm afraid of the consequences and what might happen? Right. So we think we know ourselves. And yet, from my experience, the more time goes on, the more I'm discovering.
You mentioned that, there's no one thing that's everything, but curiosity comes pretty dang close.
Yeah.
Because this has been a recurring theme in my life over the past year is get curious. Get curious, both about myself and about other people. One of the best tips that I could give to any podcast host is to be curious about their guest. Yeah. Right. What are some questions we can ask ourselves or our partners to get more curious? Because like you said, we just tend to believe our thoughts. We just tend to believe them as fact. And we rarely question anything. It's just like, oh, this is who I am. This is what I do. Yeah. So how can we start to cultivate some of that curiosity?
Yeah, great question. And I just want to give a foundation for that has totally changed my life, which is to first assume the best and then get curious. Because we can assume like, oh, you came home late. Well, you must have been doing all like I could assume the worst about someone and then start to get defensive because I've created this story in my head about what's happening.
Yep.
Or I could assume the best about someone, like, oh, I think that their intentions are good. I think that they actually care about me. I think they want to do well by me. And hey, you were late and I'm curious what happened. And, are you, first of all, like, are you okay? Right? We jump over the care for the other person when we feel offended by something or frustrated by something. So I think some good questions are, any question that's really wanting to know about someone, like how is that for you? Or, what are you I know for men, it's not always easy to say, what are you feeling? Right. So a lot of times we could say, what are you thinking? I do think it's powerful for men to get in the habit of recognizing that, oh, I do have feelings and I do have emotions and sensations in my body, not just thoughts. But right, anytime I'm trying to think of more specific questions, but anytime you're inquiring into, like I wonder why it is that way, or I wonder why that belief is there. What I wonder what my motivation is. Right?
What
Like
about like
anytime we can,
where did I learn this?
yes, where did I learn this? And how did I come to take on this belief and then really solidify it as though it's reality?
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Speaking of feelings, which
Yeah.
you're right, I for the longest time didn't have feelings. Really until after my breakup is when I actually allowed
Wow.
myself
This
to
has been
start
powerful for you.
feeling. Yes, complete 180, really.
Yeah.
So you mentioned getting your clients to ask themselves where they feel physically different sensations in their body because
Mm-hmm.
men especially have lost touch with their intuition, and
Yeah.
we for the most part no longer listen to that gut feeling, for example, right,
Yeah.
when usually that's the right answer. So what are some strategies that you teach your clients to get more in tune with their intuition and listen to their
Yeah.
body?
It's so great. I was working with a client today and we were talking about his tendency to feel small and like afraid when his wife's a really good manager of things, and when he's trying to do something or ask her something or change something, he can kind of feel into this smaller, younger
Mm,
place where he's afraid. And so I had him feel it in his body. It was like, okay, what's the posture that you take on when this persona or this part takes over? And so we had him, yeah, right. Like he actually started to feel, oh, yeah, my body gets tight and I start to shrink and I start to pull away. And I could feel it in myself. Like my eyes started to squint. And so
mm,
if you can actually start to notice, oh, okay, then when I feel stronger, when I feel clearer, what happens in my body? Oh, okay, my breath, I might start to fill out a little bit more with my breath, my back, my spine feels stronger and taller. I actually remember that I have legs and feet that I'm standing on, so it's always an option when you have a thought to then go check in and see, oh, what are the sensations that are connected with this thought, or what are the emotions that are connected with this thought. So sometimes I'll have men, go out into the world and just notice what they're thinking and then connect it to the visceral sensations and the emotional sensations for that practice, so that then when you're
mm,
standing in front of another person, if you're having a relationship conversation, it could be work, but also we're focusing more on the romantic. If if a woman nags you like, why didn't you take out the garbage, instead of just going immediately to some kind of excuse or some kind of feeling pissed off, or like, I'll do it, I'll get to it whenever, we can start to notice, oh, something, my stomach just clenched, or I just felt a burn in my chest as I wanted to lash out and lash back. And
mm,
so, again, just paying attention to what happens in my body and in my emotions as I have the thoughts.
mm,
And then it goes much better to say, like, oh, I just noticed I started to feel my stomach clench, than to say, fuck you, I'll do it when I want to. Or
Yes.
even something less, rude than that, but just a little more defensive.
Yes. And that's so important to actually identify the physical feeling. I'm trained in a form of story work called the Undefend method.
Hmm.
And once you can identify that physical sensation,
Yes.
then you can ask, okay, when is the first time that I remember feeling
Uh,
this? And then
yeah.
usually that's tied to some story in the past. It could be from childhood. It could be, yesterday, probably not
Yeah.
yesterday. It's usually
Right.
sometime in
Usually
the
farther
past.
back, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And then so you can work through that story and then you can see, oh, I feel this sensation because of
Yeah.
this thing that happened 20 years ago. And once you
Yeah.
can work through that story and see it again objectively and create that
Mm-hmm.
space and clarity and work through it, you can say,
Yeah.
oh, this feeling no longer serves me, right?
Yes.
And then you can start to carry that on into your daily life, and
That's so
those
powerful.
problems may not affect you anymore, right?
Yeah.
That only comes once you're able to first identify that
Right.
feeling, which so
Right.
many men just ignore because we're all in our heads all the time.
Well, yeah, and we're trained that way. I mean, I grew up being a very heady person, and now, my body is very much like, aware of the world and sensing. So when I walk
Mm.
around, and you can try this too, those of you who are listening, like when you walk around and you're looking, oh, there's a tree out there, that's a thought and that's a concept. And then you can start to feel, what is it like to be around a tree, right? Or there's a person over there. What does it feel like to be near that person? What happens in my body? And then you start to, I always talk about sex as a more concrete example, because if we're thinking about sex versus actually our bodies are awake and aware and of the more subtle sensations, becomes much hotter and more pleasurable.
100%. And I've got a perfect quote from
Yeah.
your book to highlight this. When we pay closer attention, everything we experience peaks at least one of our five senses.
Mm.
As we focus on feeling these
Yeah.
sensations rather than just thinking about them, we feel more sensation and pleasure in our bodies. The more we focus on the subtleties of those sensations, the more orgasmic we become. Feeling rather than thinking about our experience is a way to add dimension to the pleasure and connection we feel.
Yeah.
And I
That
love
gets
that.
fun.
Yeah, because really just like right now, you can like I'm barefoot, so I can feel the
Can
carpet
feel.
on
Yeah.
my feet and
Yeah.
smells and sounds. Once you can actually pay attention to those things,
Yeah.
it becomes like you're in a constant state of awe or
Yeah.
wonder,
Right.
right?
It's like you've taken mushrooms or whatever, and so you're
Yes.
like, wow, I
Yes.
actually haven't. This is just what life feels like now.
Yes. Yes. I've told people it's like, yeah, for the past like 8 months, I've felt like I've been on, a low dose of mushrooms, just
Yeah.
in tune with my senses. And it's like this is
Yes.
just the way that it can be now,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah. And we're
before I
so
was so
conditioned
shut
out
off
of
to,
that.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I was shut off to my feelings, just in this little box. But yeah, open yourself up, feel these
Yeah.
things.
And I think about sex. I think a lot of people in the world are having sex from a place of much less embodiment, right? And when
Yes.
you actually start to, like you said, oh, I can feel the carpet and I can smell the rain and I mean, it just becomes, I talk about it as like a four-dimensional experience as opposed to a one-dimensional experience, right? And as you start to feel all of these things around you, you also start to feel the sensations of other people. So then you're with a partner and she's, riding a wave of orgasm, and then you start to feel it in your own body, and then you get at least twice as much the pleasure as
It's
you
so
would
much
already have.
better.
It's so much better that way. And beautiful and intimate. I mean, we can talk about the pleasure aspect of it. It's amazing, but it's also incredibly connecting and bonding and healing and transforming.
Which is what most relationships are missing. You mentioned at the very beginning of this book, first time divorce rates are like 50%, second time divorce rates are like 75%, something like that.
Yeah.
And I think, and even just uh, relationships in non-married
Yeah.
couples,
Dating. Yeah.
From my experience and from most people I know, it's primarily physical. Like a lot of us don't really take the time to go deeper because, again, we're not honest with ourselves and able to get vulnerable. So it just stays kind of surface level. And then down the road, once we grow uh, and maybe start to ask ourselves some of these questions, like, what do I actually want?
Mm-hmm.
Then that ends to the relationship ending, right?
Right. What do I
So,
actually want and how good could it be? Right. Or like a lot of times when I see men holding up that facade of I have to be the rock or I have to be strong or I've got to just, keep going and not feel, then they don't actually get to be loved. You don't get to be loved for who you are. You don't get to actually feel the care and love and all of that that's coming at you because of that rigidity or stuckness.
yeah, so I do believe that men should be the rock and be strong, but that absolutely does not mean not feeling.
Not feel and not be vulnerable.
I
And
used to think that,
yeah.
and now it's quite the opposite, right? It was this false sense of masculinity that I
Mm-hmm.
had, like
Mm-hmm.
suppressing the feelings and just shoving them down and not feeling them. That's absolutely not the case, which is what
No.
unfortunately most men do think, right? They can't show emotion. That's a sign of weakness.
I was just going to say it's so strong. There's a strength that it takes to actually show the emotion. I have a TEDx talk called What a Thousand Men's Tears Reveal about the crisis between men and women.
Mm.
And I talk about the difference between a hot potato kind of feeling something and just being like, blah, dumping it or trying to get rid of it versus actually, and this goes back to what we were saying before, if you know yourself and know that you are innately good, then what is the problem with having emotions? And so
Yep.
then you can feel them from a place of strength, clarity, and love, right? Instead of shame and embarrassment and like trying to get rid of it.
So now let's talk about sex because
Okay.
sex sells.
It's fun.
And people also love numbers.
Mm,
So let's talk about the 4 foundations of conversations about
okay.
sex that create more pleasure and connection.
Great.
So, number 1, prioritize curiosity over fear and defensiveness. We,
Right.
we
We
talked on
covered
this
that.
one a little bit,
Yep.
but give us the highlights of this.
Yeah, I mean the highlights just going back to that one where if we get curious about, what do I want and what do you want and what feels good and how could we be more connected? First of all, most people are not talking about sex. And there's I think hope and pray has a different connotation, like that we don't, so a woman doesn't get pregnant. But the hope and pray here is like, well, I hope or pray that our sex life is going to get better, but we're not talking about it. We're not, having conversations about it. So the curiosity of, wow, well, what would you like to explore tonight or this month? Or what do you want to feel? Or,
Mm,
how do you want to, like, what parts of yourself do you want to experience in our sex?
mm.
People don't usually ask those questions, and it
No.
gets so much richer when you do.
Yeah, I wish I had a partner who'd ask me those questions, right?
Right?
That's that. Yeah, this book is going to help a lot of people.
Mm.
Number 2, and I love this one also, get to the root of a desire.
Yeah.
What are the
Yeah.
highlights on this one?
Well, so the highlights on that one are we initially have a desire. And I think the example I gave was someone who um,
Wanted to be tied up.
wanted to be tied up, right? Okay. So I want to be tied up. Now, if you don't know why your partner wants to be tied up, it could be a really bad situation. So one of the examples I gave is, some people want to be tied up because they actually want to feel contained and they want to feel that sense of somebody's got me. Other people want to be tied up because, oh, well, if I'm tied up, I can't do anything. And so there's nothing I can do that's wrong. Some people want to feel that sense of like, oh, you're just, I'm loving you so much through this, through having you and through like I want to make you into a gift or I'm making you something, beautiful. Like I'm acknowledging your beauty. And some people want it because it's like, oh, I want to have this intensity of experience and I want to go somewhere I've never gone before. So if we don't know why somebody wants something, then we can create something that goes against the very thing that they're looking for. Now, sometimes that can be cool because we can surprise ourselves and have these new experiences. But oftentimes what happens in couples too is if it's like, oh, I want this, I want to be tied up. And the other person says, well, I don't like that, or I don't do that, or that's not me. If we start to get to, we can get curious, and then we can understand like, well, what are you wanting from that experience? Maybe it's not, doesn't have to happen with ropes, right? If I want to know that you love me enough that you're going to totally care for me for a certain amount of time, and I don't have to do anything to prove that I'm good enough, we could do that in 100 different ways. Mm-hmm. So when you get to the root of a desire, there are many, many more ways to play with it.
And number 3, be clear whether you are in exploring or decision-making mode. And I highlighted here, clarity about whether we are in an exploring or decision-making mode is priceless. When we clarify that we are in an exploratory conversation, it takes the pressure off of us to make something happen.
Yeah, I can feel that clenching in my gut when I'm like, I think I need to know something or I need to make a decision, and I'm not ready to. And this has helped me in business conversations too. I had a business partner once where once we realized this distinction, we were like, oh my God, this is why we're fighting all the time, because you're an exploratory person and I'm a decision-making person, or vice versa. And so now I'm thinking that if you say something, we have to do something about it. Right. So again, having this consciousness of, wait, are we just exploring ideas that could be fun, but maybe we would never even do them, or, I'm not attached to them, or we're discovering like what would feel good to each of us, versus, oh, now I'm getting online or I'm going to a store to buy the rope to create this experience. Like, there's so much more freedom that comes in when we're saying, okay, we're in exploratory conversation. We're not going to make anything happen until we both feel good about it. Now there's a little more ease there.
Speaking of both feeling good about it, number 4, be willing to collaborate.
Yeah.
So if something comes up in an exploratory conversation and you decide that you want to take action on it, one partner is feeling a little hesitant, how can they start to collaborate to form something that they both agree on?
Yeah. Well, I'll go back to curiosity, which is okay. And vulnerability, starting to say, all right, I know we just created this plan, let's say, and I'm starting to have second thoughts, or I'm starting to feel really scared or vulnerable, or I'm starting to wonder if I can really do this. I don't know. A lot of men, it's like, well, I don't know if I have the capacity to, I don't have the skill to do that. Right. I remember, I mean, this is vulnerable for me to say, but the being tied up is an example for me because it's something that I've really enjoyed. And I had a partner once who he was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do the knots. And I was like, I don't care if you just wrap it around me. If you're really present with me, like, I'm going to love that. Right. It's not about the skill. And so the collaboration could be one person saying, being vulnerable, like, oh no, I'm worried about getting this wrong. And then you might not feel attracted to me. And, or I'm worried that you're going to get upset with me. Okay. So what do we want to do? What do we want to do? How do we want to create more safety for ourselves and more opportunity for, this hot, loving experience?
Yeah. On the same topic, talking during sex can feel uncomfortable for a lot of people, myself included. Yeah. And we just kind of let the experience continue instead of asking questions. There's a quote in this book from, not you, something Morin, Alyssa Morin.
Oh, Alyssa. Yeah.
Yep. She says, it is helpful to ask questions that keep a person focused on their body sensations rather than bringing them back to their thoughts. And you give examples of this. Yeah. Instead of, what would you like me to do right now? Ask something along the lines of, would you like me to do X or Y? So giving them options. I think that's fantastic because I've been in that situation before where it's like, what would you want me to do right now? You give the example of, there's a million different options to choose from.
Right. And then we kind of like, right, the overwhelm of, I don't really know. And it's scary oftentimes to say what we want if we don't know if someone else is going to be okay with that.
Yes. And then you get into the appreciation sandwich. So if something is happening that you don't enjoy, instead of rejecting them, and that could shut off the whole rest of the experience.
Yeah.
The appreciation sandwich. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the appreciation sandwich. And, some people find this to be awkward. So you can really make it your own. You don't have to do this exactly like I say it. But the appreciation sandwich is sandwiching a request in the midst of, in the middle of an appreciation before and an appreciation after. So if somebody's touching me and I'm like, ooh, ouch, that I really don't like how that's going. Um, I don't want you to fake it, but instead of, you could take a moment to just be like, hey, I really love that you're touching me, or I love that you're touching my breasts, or, whatever. Could you do it a little bit lighter? And then the appreciation on the other end it could be a thank you. It could be like a breath or a moan. It could, it doesn't have to be like a very intellectual statement, but we're all really vulnerable in the bedroom, and our egos come up and we're afraid of doing things wrong. And, it still happens to me where I'm like, ooh, I now have the capacity to get over it faster. But when someone says that they don't like something that I'm doing, I still am like, oh shit, I'm bad. I did it wrong. They're not going to want me anymore. Right. So it's pretty common for all people of all genders to have that experience. And so again, I think the more we can, um, gently ask for what we want, or with appreciation ask for what we want, instead of the thing that kills a sexual experience is the disgust or the expectation, like you should already know how to do this. And that is just toxic, and nobody likes to be on the receiving end of that.
And by the way, same thing goes for business, right? Like if you're giving a critique, instead of just giving the critique, give a compliment sandwich. Hey, you've been doing a really good job at this, and I think it could be made better by this.
Yeah.
Again, keep up the good work.
Yeah.
Right? Like you'd be much more receptive to hearing that than, hey, you're fucking this up, fix it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I love, I think from a place of scarcity, we don't want to pause in the middle of a sexual experience because, oh no, what if I can't get back to these amazing sensations? But I've had many beautiful conversations in the middle of sex where one of us acknowledged, or one of us noticed, like, hey, you seemed like you got a little bit distant, or are you doing okay? Or, is this working for you? Or any of those things. And to be willing to be that raw and real will exponentially make your sex life better, because then you're not just trying to like skip over the realization that, oh my God, we're not actually being that connected right now, or that person's not really enjoying this. It takes a little bit to trust that we can get back on track, and that we don't have to just have a straight shot, from as pleasure builds all the way to orgasm. Like it can be a ride of ups and downs, and we can feel, and then the sensation can go away, and we can still stay connected through all of it and create incredible experiences.
Speaking of making sex better, I like the idea of the debrief after sex, the debrief, and asking questions.
Yeah.
Some examples that you gave is, what did you enjoy about our sex? What could make our sex even better in the future? And is there anything that feels vulnerable about our experience that you can tell me now, even if you didn't say it then?
Yeah.
Which, as we just mentioned, it can feel extremely vulnerable, and a lot of times things don't go, or things go unsaid because we're in the act. But then after the fact, in that debrief, that's a much less vulnerable time, especially if they ask you that question.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to.
It still can be really scary, but I've found, man, I had one a couple months ago where I just got to I got to speak to a moment where I started kind of losing myself and just wasn't as present, and went into fear, and I didn't catch it in the moment enough that I could speak to it, but I caught it the next morning. And to be able to say that, and then the next time we were together, there was that recognition. And I phrased the second question that way on purpose, like, what would you want more of? Because we could also phrase it as a complaint. Oh, I didn't like this. But when we start to understand that every one of our complaints actually is also a desire, it feels much better for someone to receive the desire than, I didn't like that you touched me without really attuning to me. Oh, well, what I really want is for you to attune more to my body. And that feels like I'm not being punished.
Yes, that goes with everything. Switching things from negations, a focus on what you don't want, what can't go right, what won't happen, to affirmations, what you do want, what you can do, things like that. So that's just a general life rule, switching things from the negation to the affirmation. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left. So let's do rapid fire with the 6 fundamentals of deeper intimacy and better sex. So I will name the fundamental and you will give the highlights.
Okay.
Cool. So number 1, be on the same team.
Yeah. Instead of thinking, oh, well, if I get more of this, then you have to have less of that. Or if you get more of that, I have less of this, right?
It's not a competition.
It's like, no. And how do we create a win-win dynamic there?
Love it. Number 2, differences can bring you closer.
Yeah. So again, when we get curious about our differences, we can start to recognize, oh, you bring this to the relationship, I bring this. We don't have to be the same. And can we be willing to explore how you like it versus how I like it? And we can play with that together.
Complementary opposites, like a yin yang.
Yes, exactly.
Number 3, and we touched on this a little bit, assume the best about each other rather than the worst.
Yeah, that one's huge, to really just get into the mindset of, all right, I chose this person I'm in relationship with or I work with or whatever, I'm here because of something that I really liked or appreciated or even loved about this person. So, all right, let me assume the best and then try to figure out what's going on versus assuming the worst. And then it all goes downhill from there.
99% of the things we worry about are just created in our own head.
Yeah.
Like the stories we tell ourselves. So I love that. Assume the best. Here's an important one. Share why to deepen understanding.
Yeah. Right. That one goes back to the root of a desire too, right? It's like, oh, I want to feel close to you. So I would love to talk about having, this kind of emotional experience or sexual experience. If we leave out the why, people fill it in, and we usually have all these, fears and what, you don't love me anymore. You're not attracted to me anymore. You think this is,
automatically worst case scenario.
Yes. So when you get to share the why and what you want, then someone is eased into this conversation.
And we just talked on this one as well, so we can skip this, but I'll mention it. Use desires, not complaints, to create more connection. So again, switching from the negations to the affirmations. And then last, but certainly not least, undefend yourself.
I love the book Undefended Love. It's amazing. It's another, it's a cornerstone of the work I do, where we start to really look at, all right, if I didn't have to defend or prove anything, then I can actually hear my partner if there's something that isn't working for them, or if they're upset about something, and I don't have to make myself bad or wrong. And so then we can actually be close and connected, as opposed to just defending against each other.
All right. Last question. This was one of the questions that I got on the Instagram story that I put out. What are your takes on semen retention?
I think anytime that we can be at choice about what our bodies do, I think it's awesome. It's supposedly, like, I don't know the health history, but I've read, some of the Taoist literature that really talks about semen retention being healthy for men, especially as they get older. And the amazing part about it is that then you get to play and you get to choose, okay, when am I going to climax, and how do I co-create this beautiful experience with another person, and we can both be at choice. Then, I mean, there's so much more I could say, and we only have another minute, but it's like, right, that's it. It's like, it opens up a whole portal to sensual and intimate and sexual experiences that go beyond anywhere that, happens when you're not at choice.
Yeah. Especially as a man, being able to keep that power, like you said, choose, okay, now I will release. And one of the things you mentioned, when you orgasm is dopamine is one of the neurotransmitters that drops, which can then cause depression, anxiety, and lack of energy and ambition. Yep. Which for most men, when they have that release, it's what do? You roll over and go to bed. You're lethargic, right? So yeah,
so I'm not saying it shouldn't happen. Like it's not like you can never, it's not like you can never come, but right. Again, to be aware and to be conscious and notice, oh, what is getting curious? What is the impact on my body when it happens? And how often does it actually feel healthy for me? And right. All of those questions we can ask ourselves.
Yep. Shana, thank you so much for coming on. This was wonderful. The book was wonderful. We could go for another hour at least with all the highlights that I made in here. So where can people find your book?
Yes, you go to my website, shanajamescoaching.com, and Shana is Shana. There's a spot that says book, and you can click on it, or you can go shanajamescoaching.com/honest-sex, and it'll show you all the options to buy.
Perfect. Links will be in the show notes. Highly recommend you guys pick this up. I only have people on the podcast who I believe in and who I clearly read the book. Look, you can see the highlights in here. Like I actually read it and went through it. Like this is a good book, right?
I appreciate that.
So Shana, thank you. I know we're at time. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.